Welcome to Dram Fine Whiskey. My name is Matt, and today I'm looking at one of my favourite whiskies from the Powers range, the John's Lane release. This is a really nice little whiskey, so let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you all about it. This is a single pot still whiskey, which is the style of whiskey that's unique to Ireland. In the mash bill for a single pot still whiskey, they use a mix of malted and unmalted barley. Unmalted or green barley often adds a nice orchard fruits and biscuity notes to Irish whiskey, which is very distinct of a pot still style. This style of whiskey is often also characterised by having a really rich, dense, oily mouthfeel, so the flavours that are in this whiskey, they'll sit with you, they'll linger. It makes this style of whiskey really great for sipping because you can just enjoy a glass for a very long time. Now the Midleton distillery, which produces Powers, also produces Midleton Very Rare, Redbreast, Green Spot, Jameson. It produces a lot of whiskies, but because the pot still whiskey allows you to use a different mix of malted and unmalted barley, because they age all the whiskies in different styles, each one of these whiskies can be completely different and they're very distinct from each other. And Powers is equally different, especially the John's Lane release. So let's get in for the nose. On the nose, I'm getting almost like a kind of a citrusy or tropical fruit note. There's a lot of kind of bright, fresh, juicy kind of notes you get out of the nose of this whiskey. There's also kind of an earthy aroma that's coming out of here, somewhere maybe between cocoa powder and tobacco, that kind of strong, dense, earthy scent. There's also a huge base of vanilla that's coming out of this whiskey, and of course the traditional pot still spices, that kind of like almost a white peppery spiciness that kind of comes through on the nose. And there's a lot in this whiskey. It is a 12-year-old single pot still whiskey, so it has had a lot of time to mature, it has had a lot of time for these flavours to develop, and it's a really good nose. So let's go in for the palate. Up front, that pot still spiciness is very evident. It is kind of like a white peppery kind of spiciness. There's a bit of baking spice in there, kind of cloves almost. That sweetness from the vanilla, it's almost honey-like, it's kind of syrupy almost. It's very mouth-coating. There's a lot of sweetness in here. It kind of sits with you, it lingers, it kind of spreads out across your mouth. There's a lot of flavour in here. I'm getting a lot of that kind of spiciness, a lot of that traditional pot still note in there. There's a little bit of a kind of a biscuity note as well. There's a lot kind of to unpack in this mouthfeel. There's a lot kind of to unpack here, so let's go in again. On the second go around, some more of the kind of orchard fruit notes are coming out from me. I'm getting a bit of almost like a red apple, maybe something like as well like a dried citrusy note is kind of coming through. Again, that base of vanilla, that base of pot still spice is very present there. Whereas kind of as you go in, as you get used to the whiskey, there's a lot more to kind of unpack in terms of the flavouring you can find in here. So now let's talk about the finish. This whiskey is coming in at 46%, so it's not by any means a really overly alcohol-y whiskey. There's not a huge amount of burn on this whiskey. When you swallow it, there's a little bit of a tingle from the spice, but there's no real alcohol burn on this whiskey. It is quite well balanced. There's kind of almost like a toasted oak note that comes in at the end. You can like taste that barrel influence. The kind of cocoa note from the nose makes a reappearance on the finish. There's almost like a red wine tannins, that kind of dryness that appears in the side of your mouth when you drink a red wine. That kind of cocoa powder kind of dryness comes in there. It's quite pleasant. There's a lot of earthy aromas in there as well. The sweetness does linger. That kind of honey-like, really syrupy, dense vanilla sweetness does linger, does hang around. That kind of syrupy vanilla sweetness does keep everything balanced between the pot still spices, between the kind of cocoa dryness, that honey vanilla sweetness just kind of lingers. And it makes the whole thing kind of a nice pleasant experience to sip on this whiskey, to kind of go back to it, to slowly enjoy it. It's not really one you'd be wanting to drink huge gulps of because that flavour profile is just so dense, there's just so much to unpack in this whiskey. It's actually a really good whiskey. And that's my tasting notes for Powers John's Lane release. If you like this whiskey, let me know down in the comments below how you think it compares to other Irish whiskies at this price point. While you're there, you might hit thumbs up, you might even consider subscribing. I put out a new whiskey review every Wednesday, and I put out a new cocktail recipe every Friday. So until next time, sláinte.